Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to be here.
Our first live event
Ever.
ever. Um, so to introduce ourselves, so I'm Tess and this is Sam, and we are the authors of Descrits, this lovely book. Hi, Matt, right here. Um, and as you all are joining, we will just slowly explain why we wrote it and what's in it, and maybe our experience with the ARE. And then you all can ask questions as we go. We have some commonly asked questions we'll start with. Um, yeah, and then we'll just see how it goes. Feel free to ask anything that you want, any questions you have. We'll try to get to all of them. Um, yeah, so our story, we're both architects. We met while we were in our MArch program at Yale, and we finished our exams last August. We took them all in 6 months. It was very stressful. We were very mad the entire time because of how stressful and annoying the situation was. Um, and basically, the whole time we were just like, why do we not even know what is on these exams? And when we finally finished them and had a chance to reflect and talk to some of our friends taking the exams, we realized that if we really wanted to sit down and write our advice, we could write a whole book. And that's what we did. I think, like, in my opinion, having friends that are doctors and lawyers, like the baseline information we should know about these tests is like what's on the exams and where do I go to find that information. And the whole time that was like the number one issue we had with every new exam. We just didn't even know where to start.
Right.
Um,
I mean, it's funny if you explain to other professionals the insanity of the architectural registration process, they'll look at you like you're a little crazy. I mean, there's not really a parallel, I think,
yeah,
for how obtuse and um, just impossible to understand this process is. So it was from that place of real frustration that we put this book together.
you want to say what's in the book?
Sure. So Descrits, The Insider's Guide to the ARE, is in three parts. The first section is more or less an FAQ. So this is our understanding of what are the big burning questions that someone that knows very little about the process comes to the ARE with. So things like what order should I take the test in? How much do I need to study? When should I study? All the way down to what we think you should eat on the test day, which is really what, after many sort of trials and errors, we ended up with. So it's a really sort of personal set of questions and personal set of answers. And then the second section is comprised of 6 outlines, one for each exam. This is the information of what are the topics I need to know and where can I find the information. So the two basic questions that should be answered for everyone taking any test. Um, and this gets down to the level of detail of what pages do I need to read from what resources, so that you don't waste your time and you can really focus your efforts on the material that you'll be tested on. And
The third part.
the third part is the essentially our notes, Tess's notes. We ended up with this treasure trove of highly organized information, and we polished it, produced a sort of spark notes for our readers across 27 topics, so from structures to MEP to contracts to project delivery methods. Each one is a topic, and we've laid out a sort of baseline set of information
Yeah,
that you must know,
it's like Spark Notes.
and you supplement it with your reading.
Right. So I think that about
So
sums it up.
yeah, that's the roadmap.
That's who we are. Those are that's why we wrote Descrits, and that's kind of our experience. And I think we will just get started with some of the commonly asked questions that we have. So I think the first question we always get asked is like, what order do I take these exams in, and how do I get started? And I think there's a few different ways to approach the exams. I'll tell you what we did, which we do recommend, and that's to take them basically in NCARB's order, except to move construction evaluation to after the project management, and practice management exams. So the order that we recommend is practice management, project management, construction evaluation, programming and analysis, PPD, and then PED. And there are a few things that this order does. It generally moves from easiest to hardest, which I recommend. Like, it just takes a while to understand like how NCARB is asking questions and to get used to the software. And if you're going to testing centers, to get used to that whole process. The first time I had to go through the line like 4 times because they didn't tell me I had to take my earrings off, and I like didn't know that I needed my ID, and the whole thing was just super stressful. So we recommend kind of like ramping up, and the tests are also a little bit cumulative. So you can get totally random questions in the hardest exam from the first exam, and it's just that much more helpful if you have all of this knowledge going into the hardest exam instead of saving the easiest ones for last, which is what some other people do. If you're trying to get them done as quickly as possible and you're like studying full time, you don't have a job, you can take them starting in the middle. So like PA, PPD, PDD, then do the CE and then the practice management exams. I think to start with PA is like a tricky exam, and I don't recommend starting with that one unless you really have time to like fully prepare for that exam.
I mean, so much of this for us was psychological,
Yeah.
so you just want to start off on the right foot,
Yeah.
get a victory, and then
Once you've
your
passed 2
confidence is there.
exams, if you fail one, you're like, it's okay, I've got 2 under my belt, like I can totally do this, versus failing one of your first couple exams, like mentally that's just so tough. So that's what I would say on that. In terms of getting started and how to like approach this, I think one thing we did that really worked well for us is we obviously took them together, but we had another friend that we took all the exams with too, and the 3 of us had like, I think we like ordered takeout, we watched some of like the introduction NCARB videos, and we plotted out our schedule, at least for the first few exams. And this is really helpful for a number of reasons. It holds you accountable. It holds you accountable to a schedule because you're accountable to your friend and you don't want to let your friend down. It's almost harder to let your friend down than it is to let yourself down. So I really recommend, if you can, find a study buddy, find someone to do this with. I think it will just make it so much easier, and it's a built-in support network if you have a question, or if you fail one of them, et cetera, et cetera. Then the second thing that we did, as I mentioned, figure out the order that you're going to take the exams in, and book your first exam. I think it's really, you're not going to study until you have that deadline.
and make your study buddies book their exams.
Yes, everyone book your exam. Definitely recommend. In terms of the like timing of that, I think the first exam definitely take a month to study for that's practice management. Give yourself a month. Going into project management, as people mention often, there's a lot of overlap between those 2 exams. So I think you can schedule the second one 2 weeks after that. And we get into all of this in more detail in the book. But
And I think it's important to say also with this month, I mean, we did the 6 exams in 6 months, so we were really pushing it. So I'm sure you could definitely take longer, but certainly don't take less.
Yeah.
And in that month, that means, at least speaking for us personally and what we recommend in the book, you focus a lot on the weekends. So Saturday and Sunday was all airy for 6 months. And I think the amount that you put in during the week sort of depends on the person. Tess is much more of a steady as you go, a constant amount of time each day. That's really hard for me, so I would pick a few weeknights and put in several hours as I went. Take some time off here and there.
Yeah. And in terms of just, if we're talking about now a study schedule, definitely the 2 weekends before your exam, we recommend taking the exams on Monday so you can get the full weekend to study and you don't have like work stuff in the back of your mind. So you're studying those full 2 weekends, and then a little bit the weekend before that, the 3rd weekend out. And the first weekend, you're kind of getting your bearings, figuring out your your study plan and what you need to look at. And one thing that we do recommend doing, that's why we love Black Spectacles so much, we took all of the Black Spectacles exams for every single exam. And those are by far the most accurate representation of what the actual exam will be like, both because it's the only resource that has the right format and has the right interface, but also in terms of the difficulty level and the questions. So going back to the PJM, PCM question, a lot of people recommend like study for them both at once. And this also applies to PPD and PDD. And I actually really don't recommend that. I don't really even know what that means. I think there's a lot of overlapping content. So take them one at a time and you'll automatically be studying for both at once, but focus on the first one that you're going to take, and take those practice exams right before the exam. And then after that, switch to the next exam and you'll already be that much further along. I think trying to like get in the mindset of both at once is just really difficult. Especially PPD and PDD have like very different mindsets. PPD is much more conceptual. It's more like programming and analysis in the kind of level of detail it's asking you, whereas PDD is very details focused, construction details, and you don't really need to know much about construction details for PPD. So for that reason, it's important to like mentally separate them, and always before you take the exam on Monday, take practice exams that weekend, and it'll get you into the mindset. I would say. So that we just answered a lot of different things.
Yeah, we have multiple feeds of questions coming from everyone. Thank you for all your questions. So we have someone asking, do you think it is a good idea studying for PCM and PJM at the same time, schedule exams 1 week apart from each other? You sort of
just mentioned that. So I think tackle them one at a time, I would say. But definitely if you take a month for PCM, practice management, I think you really only need 2 weeks for PJM if you're going to go right into studying. To go over like the difference between the two, so practice management is all about running a practice. So you need to know the different like setups of how firms are legally organized. You need to understand like the standard of care, ethical questions about that architects have to face. There's a lot of questions about there's some contract-based questions. And then there's some questions about like risk management, things like that. Going into project management, so and there's also firm financials. You'll get some like weird math questions, and you should definitely know like the basics of how firms run their financial books. Project management is about how to run a project. So understanding like project delivery models is super important, and then contracts is super important. So for example, if for practice management you've looked at the contracts, for project management, all you'll have to do is like go into more detail on those projects, on those contracts, and on the way that projects can be set up in terms of delivery models. Was there anything else to that question?
No, but I think it leads maybe into the question of overlapping resources. So what are the baseline books that we need to start with?
Do you want to go grab some of them?
Yeah.
So I'll actually pull up a spread from Deskrits to answer that question. So here's one of like the intro spreads. I don't know if you can even see that a little bit, but basically we have listed all of the resources we used for all 6 exams, and then we have this matrix that shows which exams it's relevant for. So if you're just starting, I would say the two resources you need to buy. The first is the Ballast ARE manual, which you've all probably heard. Which this is ours. That's actually, you have the cover down there.
Oh.
So this is just like a fun fact. This is it. This is what it looks like. We actually cut it up. This is how we did that. And that was because this is all you need for the first 3 exams. This is what you need for the last 3 exams. So we didn't want to be lugging around this giant book when all we needed was like 50 pages. And I think mentally even that just makes it a little bit more manageable to like only have to carry around that much. So this book, I mean, we talk about this a lot in Deskrits. Like, it's very important. It's a very comprehensive resource, but they often get wrong what you need to know for each exam. And we do walk through that in the book. Like, sometimes it just includes way too much information.
It's really easy to get sucked in and waste time. Like,
you don't need to know, like, the bending stress of steel or whatever. There's some, like, crazy calculations in there for the last couple exams, and you just, like, do not need to know that. So don't get stressed out if Ballast seems like going into way too much detail.
And again, we try and, if I would say we probably specify reading 40% of the book.
Yeah.
And that 40% is really important, but
Yeah.
that saves you 60% of your time.
Right.
So
They also, like, I remember, and this was so infuriating, their section on hazardous materials comes in PPD, but you're going to get a ton of questions about that in programming and analysis, and it doesn't even tell you to look at that. So you can't only read ballast. Some people will try to tell you that you can. I just don't think that's a good idea. Anyway, so that's the first resource. This, if you're starting with PCM and PJM, I really recommend getting your hands on this. The Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. This is a big, expensive book. I think you could try to split one with your friends. A lot of firms have these like in their libraries that you can borrow. I'll let you put that down. If you don't want to buy it, I think don't tell anyone we said this. There are probably PDFs floating around somewhere. Just to say, don't say anything. We didn't say that. But that one, those two books are really going to be the most important for the first two exams, in addition to the AIA contracts, which are free online. So I would say get your start with those. What's next?
what was the best material you used to pass PPD and PDD? The wide range of material covered in the exam is incredibly overwhelming.
Yes, agreed. It's very overwhelming.
Yeah.
I think the next two books that you'll need for those exams especially, also helpful for PA, are the Chang books. So that's Building Construction Illustrated and Building Codes Illustrated. So Building Construction Illustrated has a lot of details. That book is very helpful for PDD. That's this one. I like had to buy this in college, so I just had a copy of it, and I don't think this is the most recent, and it was totally fine, just in case that helps anyone. And then Building Codes Illustrated. So this, you really want to read side by side with the actual IBC. And when you're studying IBC, this is kind of a side note, really important to get your hands on a PDF of the code. They have like an online interface, but what you're going to get in the case studies is a PDF. So you need to be able to like navigate it, remember where things are. We're all visual people, so I find that helps a lot, rather than being able to use the hyperlinks in the online interface. Really recommend studying from the PDF and becoming very, very familiar with that, especially for PDD. But it's important, starting in PA, you should start to be familiar with the codes, I would say. Mm-hmm. Oh, one other thing. Another book that's very helpful studying mechanical systems for PPD is the Architect's Studio Companion. I always mess up the name. I just want to make sure I got that right. This is a book that a lot of people had to buy for school. I did not. Yes, Architect's Studio Companion. No, we don't have it. We borrowed it from someone. It's like red. The cover is red. And this goes into the perfect amount of detail for mechanical systems. So whereas we mentioned like ballast often goes into way too much detail, that book is like a good conceptual primer on the different types of mechanical systems. And for PPD, that's really all you need to know. So if you're looking for a resource for that, we recommend Architect's Studio Companion. Mm-hmm. Have a water break.
Let's see. I think we may have touched on this, but just to make sure we get to the question. I'm planning to take my very first PCM end of the year. I have no idea what material to start from to get in the groove. What do you suggest?
So I think ballast is always a good place to start, especially for those first two exams. I don't think it goes into too much detail for those at all. So I would definitely read ballast first. In Descripts, we recommend, that's this guy.
A little bit.
Yeah, and this is for the first three, so it's just that first bit. We actually recommend studying topic by topic rather than resource by resource. That becomes much more important for the last three exams, the big ones. For the first ones, you can just kind of read ballast and then reference other material to fill in your knowledge. I think that should be fine. So,
but I mean, that's a really good point. That
yeah.
It's really hard to do. I would say we had a hard time doing that because you don't really know where to find the exact material on a topic by topic basis. It's much easier to plow through a book and get information that way. So in that sense, I think that's something that you'll find with Descripts. If you're looking at mechanical, we'll tell you how to get it from resource A, B, C, and D.
It's like ballast has some like structural stuff that's important, but it doesn't have everything, and you'll need to reference the Ching books and like back and forth, and it's important to approach things topic by topic rather than like realizing a week before your exam that you've spent 3 weeks reading Ballast and there's like all this other stuff you need to know. I think it makes much more sense to go through topic by topic.
Here's a fun one, unrelated to the test taking. Actually, when will your book be available back in stock? So we're working on it. We're so thrilled with the recent demand, and we can't wait to get a book into your hands. And we're trying really hard to get you that as fast as possible.
Yep.
We expect to be back in stock on. We were hoping to ship basically a week from Saturday.
Yeah. So just to give some backstory, our printer is like a small business and they are still operating at half capacity because of COVID. So our schedule is basically taking twice as long because they have half as many people working on the books. So really sorry about that. We often have misprints that we can sell at a discount. If you're interested in that at any point there, it's like fully complete, just not up to our quality standards. Just email us, and especially if you're also like really on a budget, and we can work something out with you. Our goal is to have everyone
message
have
us on Instagram.
Yeah.
Or anything.
Yeah.
Okay. How does your matrix compare to the NCARB one?
So the NCARB matrix is insane, if I recall correctly. I think I looked at it once and never looked at it again. It basically is trying to have you purchase and then read an entire library worth of books. And I just found it so overwhelming and like completely unrealistic. There's no way you're gonna look at all those resources. So ours, I mean, I'll show it to you again. It's half, I mean, probably less than half. It's like a fraction. These are the books right there. They're not even all books. I mean, on here is, I'll just read down it. Ballast practice exams, Black Spectacles, Ballast practice problems, which is optional, AHPP, the AIA contracts, the AIA code of ethics, the Schiff-Hardin lectures, which we should mention, those are actually really helpful for the first 3 exams, practice management, project management, and construction evaluation. That's like essentially having a law professor explain the AIA contracts. So super, super helpful, especially if you're like an auditory learner. IBC, the literal code, ADA, the literal section, not a code, it's a law or something. ADA, yeah. Then Building Codes Illustrated, which we just talked about, Building Construction Illustrated, which we talked about, Architect Studio Companion, which we also mentioned, the Site Planning and Design Handbook, which is optional. This is very helpful for PA. You can buy a PDF online for like $9, which I think is what I did. It goes into a bit more detail on like sustainable site measures and green infrastructure, which I'm just interested in, and I found it to be a really great resource. We recommend reading like maybe it's like a chapter and a half of that, not much, but it is helpful and it fills in some of the holes that Ballast leaves. And then you need this one like 4-page FEMA document for PPD, and that's it. That's literally all that's in our matrix. So hopefully that answers that question.
But again, no need to read the whole thing, right?
Yeah, right. Of those resources,
to read.
yeah, you don't need to read the whole thing of any of them. Yeah.
I think you just answered this in your book. You should just reading the site planning book for PA.
Yes.
I'm taking PA soon, but I don't have that book. Is it worth it to buy it?
I would say if you're fine with the PDF, that $9 copy is worth it, I think. Especially if you don't know much about green infrastructure. And I think there's actually a hazardous material section in there that's very helpful, which is a subject that I was very shocked by how much it came up in my PA exam. So yeah, I think it's pretty cheap. So I would recommend getting that one, especially if you're like nervous about the exam and just want some more information.
And they're a bit hard. Oh, look at this. So there's a link in the
There you go.
in the feed here from Black Spectacles to those Schiff-Hardin lectures.
Yeah.
I think they have moved around on the internet.
Yeah,
a few
they like
times.
took them off.
Yeah.
And then someone posted in the forum about it, but it looks like they found them, so that's helpful. Bookmark that and download them now. We have them downloaded. If you can't find them, let me know. I'll send them to you.
Okay, here's one maybe without an answer, but how many times should I read through the contracts? I would say it varies person to person.
Yeah.
But do I need to memorize them? No.
I think it really depends on how you process and remember information. So for me, like I just take notes on everything, and the act of taking notes and writing things down. I basically have it memorized, and then I read through my notes. So if you're someone that to learn something you need to read it over and over and over again, then that's what you should do. But for me, I think I actually read the contract itself maybe 2 or 3 times, but I would refer to my notes, which are now in Descripts. But that's how I study. That I have to like write it, and I think that's a visual tactile learner. So I think it depends, and this may be a moment to take a step back. I think in studying for the ARE, one thing that I realized, it's very important to kind of connect with how you learn, which for me was going back to like things I did in high school, because I really haven't had to like memorize a lot of information as an architecture major undergrad, and then obviously in grad school. So like I remember I would take notes and like make study sheets in high school, and that's how I studied for like biology or like whatever. So I think if you're having trouble processing all of the information, think back to how you tackle things in high school, and like how you really, what do you need to do to learn it? Like there'll be some sort of instinct there, and I think very important to connect with that.
And I think, although it's not important to memorize this, line by line, what is really good to know for, I would say, the contracts and IBC is the general sort of table of contents, the sort of layout of each of these documents, because you'll regularly get them on the case studies, and you don't want to waste time trying to find, section 9 of the IBC or
you should know what's in each section.
Yeah, you need to be able to,
and you should know what each contract covers. That is something you should memorize.
Yes. So I guess what we're saying is memorize the architecture of each of these documents or the table of contents, and then understand, read, and be very familiar with the specifics. But no, you're not regurgitating the information. You're not usually regurgitating information. There will undoubtedly be a few questions that ask you to pull something from memory, and it's impossible. At least our opinion is it's impossible to study with the goal of getting every single one of those questions right.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with getting some of them wrong.
Right.
Okay. I think we sort of just touched on this one, but what activities did you use to review beyond reading? Did you make flashcards? So Tess just said she takes.
This is embarrassing, but here they are.
This is interesting. This is sort of the genesis of Descripts, the color-coded notes from Tess.
In mini handwriting. This is how I study, and this is how I did it in high school too. So if you had something weird that you did like that, try it again. It might actually help.
Yeah.
So that's how I studied. I don't know how you studied.
I know it's in the back corner too, but I'm much more sort of big,
Yeah, Sam had these huge, giant sheets.
Pieces of paper with big drawings and big flowcharts. And big tables and size 24-point font compared to that chicken scratch. But I would say for both of us, we did a lot of writing it down. I think we were similar in that way. And then definitely for the details, the architectural details, it's really important, we feel, to draw them. And in drawing them, you start to understand, what they're communicating, what you really need to know. More important than knowing the specifics of every part of a detail is understanding why things are where they are, and functionally what are they doing. Because then when you see a flashing detail that's not the one that you studied exactly but is similar, you'll understand why things are in the order in which they are.
And I would say that's a general rule for all the studying. Like, the good thing about these exams compared to the 4.0 exams is they're not really testing you on like pure memorization. So generally, if you understand the concept behind something, you'll fare much better in the exam than if you just memorized like one detail, or like you memorize just like what's in the contract. Like, you have to understand what's behind everything so that you can apply it, which it's a better exam. It's harder to study for. So I would definitely recommend always make sure you know why something is the way it is, why something was written the way it is. Like, for example, I remember we had to study like the mortar profile details for, I assume that's PDD. And there's like a bunch of different kinds. Like, you literally are drawing like the way the mortar lies between the bricks. And if you understand the benefits and pros and cons of each one, and why like a weathered joint as the mortar slashed this way to prevent water from sitting on the brick, like you'll do better on the exam because you understand why something is than having to just regurgitate.
Okay. Here's a good one, an interesting one that just came in. In your book, page 10, you mentioned write down question 49 at 3:15 and start case studies at 1:30. Can you explain that a bit? So, it's a good question. So,
That doesn't make sense?
it's a good,
Doesn't make any
no,
sense.
it doesn't make sense. We'll revise it. What we're trying to say is when you start the test, you want to write down basically benchmark times for yourself.
So you got to go in with a plan. And this is especially something important to consider because they are changing the length of the exams, which we'll get into later. Like based on the number of questions, you want to leave yourself with an hour. I think we generally did an hour and a half for the case studies and checking your answers. So work backwards based on the amount of time you have to understand when you want to be finished with your multiple choice questions and also when you want to be halfway through your multiple choice questions. And the first thing I would do when we would sit down for the exam is to like write down those benchmarks. So like middle question 50 at like 3 hours, whatever, because the timer ticks backwards. Then finish with multiple choice at an hour 30, so you have an hour 30 left for the case studies, things like that. So you don't want to be like doing that math in the exam.
There's no worse feeling than being in the middle of the exam, feeling like you're going too slow, but not really knowing how slow you're going. Right.
So set those benchmarks for yourself and have those figured out before you sit down and write those down when you get in there.
Yeah.
And generally we would recommend leaving an hour and a half for the case studies. I think that's right.
Yep.
So an hour for the case studies and 30 minutes to go back through and check your flagged questions and any questions that you wrote down that you want to go back to, and any questions that you think would be helpful to look at the case study materials for. So that might be another important thing to mention. The first thing I would do in an exam, besides write down those benchmarks, is flip to the case studies, look at the resources they've given you, so like Chapter 7 of IBC, AAB 101, and write down those resources on the top of my scratch paper, so that when you're going through, if you're like, oh, this question is asking me about Chapter 7 of the IBC, like I have that, answer it the best you can, flag it, write down on your paper that you want to reference that resource for question 49 or whatever, and then if you have time, you can go back and actually look up the answer to the question. And, yeah.
Did you have a routine for test day? How early did you arrive at the testing center, and what did you bring with you? Different for both of us, I guess. I think we both regularly took our tests in the morning.
Yes, Monday morning is what I would recommend. And
so we would jump out of bed. We took our tests at the same testing center. So we would grab a bagel. Test would have something a little healthier, I think, a banana and a bar.
Yeah. Peanut butter toast with a sliced banana.
And we would take a few of our condensed note sheets with us just to reflect on the subway, quiz each other on the way there.
Like, not really.
Not really. Like, I mean, I would say within...
You're prepared.
Within an hour of starting the test, we tried to not really think too much about the content.
Within an hour of starting the test? Before starting the test?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Before starting the test.
Yeah, I think we were like 30 minutes early. It depends on how crowded your test center is. And I would always bring a water bottle with me, and I would always bring a banana, and then I think like a Lara bar or something. And important to not drink too much water. I definitely made that mistake once, because you only get one break, and those last two exams are really, really long. And I would always make myself eat something at the break, because even if you feel okay then, you don't know how you're going to feel in an hour and a half when you're like stressed and have been focusing for 4 hours. So I found a banana didn't stress me out. It was always kind of appetizing and easy on the stomach, but that's just me.
How many years of professional experience did you have when you started taking the exams? Different for both of us?
I had 2 years of professional experience at a structural engineering firm, so I really had never looked at IBC before, because as an engineer, you're looking at just totally different things, and you're not worried about if something meets the architectural code or like other issues. And you basically had like one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not
So
much.
not a lot.
Not a lot.
Which is why, and this is maybe related to this next question from Giovanni. So this Giovanni says, I recently took CE, my first ARE exam attempt. Used black spectacles, Schiff Harden, desk crits, and didn't pass in 6 weeks. And I mean, to that, I'd say completely normal.
Yeah.
And
That exam
honestly, what
sucks.
what a tough exam to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would not start with that exam.
Yeah.
I think CE also, we know this just from having a bunch of friends take it. I think each exam varies so much, and sometimes you just get an easy exam, and sometimes you get a hard exam, especially for that one where they're asking you these totally random questions out of left field that are entirely impossible to prepare for. I think like you probably just had bad luck.
Yeah. I mean, unless CE, if you're someone with 10 years of professional experience,
yeah,
and you know construction administration and detailing very well, then it's a good place to start. But other than that, I would say you want to start with PCM, PJM, stuff that is you can really read, and that's the closest to, I'm not going to say memorization, but is the closest to the sort of studying that I think we're all used to. It gets further and further into left field the closer you get to the sort of day job of architecture.
I also think the good thing about taking CE after those first two is like they all have contracts on them. So by CE, you'll really know the contracts.
Yeah,
and I think
point.
From my personal experience, like I actually thought that was not the hardest exam, but during the exam, that was the one I was like, crap, like I studied the wrong things.
Yeah.
Like this one is really hard. Like I actually really thought I failed. And I am sure that I knew the contracts like the back of my hand, and that's probably what pushed me over the pass rather than my studying of like random details, which I think was ultimately not that fruitful.
Right.
So I'll say,
and
having gone through 2 exams and answered questions on the contracts for those 2 exams, that's a really good preparation for CE.
And I would say, well, first of all, definitely don't feel defeated. And second of all, you don't have to take CE again as your next test just because you were studying CE previously. In fact, I would probably say don't do that.
Yeah, I would go to project
because it does accumulate, and you're not wasting your time by spending 6 weeks studying something and not passing. It'll help when you come back to it, and I would say just start off on an easier foot.
Yeah, definitely.
How long did you spend studying each day? Sort of touched on this earlier.
One thing I did that we didn't mention, at the time, my job was very drafting heavy, which for me, like, thanks, Giovanni, that's cute. For me, I really only need like a fraction of my brain to do that, to be quite honest. So I was able to listen to the Black Spectacles videos with like the video, under my desk. So like I wasn't looking at the video, but I was listening to it as I was working, and I think that was really helpful for me to just like incept some knowledge while doing something else, and like cover that material with only half my brain. So if you're able to do that, I do recommend that. I think during the week, other than that, I really don't think we studied. I think it's just like way too much with work, and like the last thing I wanted to do when I got home was study for the ARE. I will say the last week before the exam, we definitely were studying every day, and we're at least like looking at the material every single day.
And I think I did it slightly differently because I cannot multitask. I can't multitask. I can't work and listen to something. I can't work and think about anything else.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to, sometimes I would study a bit at lunch. I would study a bit in the evenings. Tess was able to fold that into her day job because she can do 2 things at once, but I could not do that. So I did end up studying, no more than 2 hours on a weekday, I would say. And then on the weekends, we studied
we really studied like all weekend.
Yeah.
And I don't want to minimize the amount we studied. And for us, that was just easier to like do it all together and at once.
Okay. Did you always do the preliminary exam review to preview if you passed/failed?
Yeah, I can't imagine like not looking at that. I think if you have like a stressful day at work afterwards and like you couldn't handle failing, then don't look at it. But I mean, those are all pretty much always right, so it's not like it's going to tell you you passed and you actually failed. And my heart was like definitely pounding out of my chest as I waited for that page to load. That was a horrible experience. That might be like the worst part of the ARE. But yeah, we looked at
I
it.
found myself staring at the screen for a minute just to make
You're
sure
like,
I
wait,
was
what does that
looking at
say?
it correctly.
I think more power to you if you can not look at it. It definitely made like the 10 questions leading up to that very stressful. And you just kind of would like watch the timer click down. So
yeah,
that's what I'd say about that.
Okay, how about this one? What advice might you give to someone getting ready to study, again, for exam they have taken and failed? Or for those who are already familiar with the exam topic and might not necessarily need to study it in its entirety?
Yeah, so actually, this is important. If you fail an exam, I think the most important thing to do as soon as you leave the test center is write down, just for yourself, everything you can remember about what the questions were on that exam. Like everything, and especially things that you didn't know the answer to. So that obviously like you're not going to get to studying that night. You need like a week off, like take a break. But then when you go to re-study for that material, you have a list of everything on the exam, which is super helpful because no one knows what's on these exams and it's ridiculous. And you'll also be able to figure out, okay, like what did I know pretty well going in? What did I study? And what did I like not even look at? And what things do I have to like brush up on? So I would definitely recommend doing that.
Yeah. And like we were saying with Giovanni's question, you don't have to take the same exam that you just failed.
Right.
Just to reiterate that. Especially if you may have started with some of the harder tests, get some passes under your belt and then come back to it.
Yeah. And just make sure you have those like fail notes.
Yeah.
So you're not forgetting anything.
Okay, I just passed PJM and have PPD and PDD left. How much time do you recommend to have in between testing for PPD and PDD? I hear taking these back to back is helpful. So I think
yes.
Earlier on you might have.
Yeah, I don't think we actually described this though. So definitely take those together. So also, if you're like planning out your exams, I wouldn't like plan a break between those two, for example. So if you're gonna like take a break for the holidays, like either wait and do PPD and PDD after the holidays or get them done before is kind of what I'm saying. For those, I believe that we studied for 5 weeks for PPD. And we really studied, so covered a lot of material. And then I think we studied for 3 weeks for PPD. And as I mentioned before, like you are studying for them both at once. Sorry, PDD. So confusing. You are studying for both at once, but like don't think about it like that because as I mentioned, like those two exams have a really different. You have to go in with a totally different mindset, and like it's hard to describe, but like the way they're gonna ask you questions is really different. So, like make it through all the material for PPD, which we outline in Descripts. And to prepare for that exam, you take those practice exams and you do those practice questions, and that is what gets you into the mindset and like helps you just like think about how they're asking questions of you and like the level of detail you need to know to answer the questions going in. And then once you're done with PPD, move on to study for PDD, and that goes for if you pass or if you fail. Because just because you fail PPD does not mean you'll fail PDD. A lot of people have more trouble with PPD than PDD because PPD is just a really hard exam, and like the questions are conceptual, but they're also technical.
So someone is asking, is there a difference between PPD and PDD?
Yes. So PPD is a lot more like programming and analysis. So it's asking you conceptual level questions. You're not really going to have detail questions. It's a lot
construction detail questions.
It's a lot about code, so you definitely need to know that very well. But it's going to feel a lot more like programming and analysis in terms of like there's like hotspot questions where it's like where would you place I don't even know, where would you place something, and you have to look at, I don't want to give any like specific details, but like you have to look at a map or whatever and understand what's going on site, and like from that information figure out where you would put like where you would cite something or place a mechanical system or whatever. Whereas PDD is not going to have a lot of that. It's going to be a lot of details, like drawing sets in the case studies and details.
And more code. I mean,
more code. Yeah.
I'd say the code ties those
more
two together.
detailed. Yeah, definitely. So is that the question?
Let's see. Could you share your experience during the exam on how you focus on the questions? I read the questions sometimes 3 times because another thought popped in about maybe, say, the previous question or distractions in the prometric room. Totally. I mean,
so one thing I have about distractions in the prometric room, you gotta ask for the earplugs.
Huge.
They don't give you the earplugs unless you ask for them, but they do have them. Those like headphone things just like would sit on my ears and they were so uncomfortable. So I find earplugs really help me focus, and that's something I would like. I've my whole life like put earplugs in to focus and to study, so it's almost like a ritualistic thing where if I have the earplugs in, I'm like much more focused, and I also get very distracted by sounds, so that helps a lot. I think in terms of my question, you just really need to practice. Like if you don't know something, flag it, move on, forget about it. Like especially there's a lot of questions that are like test questions on these exams, right? So like they don't even count towards your score. They're just testing how people do.
And the best way to simulate that is to take the practice tests. In Desperate, we recommend the Black Spectacles practice test. It's the single best sort of simulation of the test itself. It's out there. And when you do that, create a test-taking environment for yourself. So don't text anyone. Wear some earbuds.
Yeah, sit down and do it the whole way through. Don't like come back to it.
Yeah.
I also think. Are we done?
Oh, go ahead.
I think as you're reading the questions, it was really helpful for me to use the highlighting tool in the test and like the strike through tool as well. So like highlight the key information. They're often including information that's you don't actually need to know just to trip you up. So that like helps me focus and comprehend the question. Definitely you need to read each question multiple times. I would say that's like the single best advice I could give you, especially for all of them, but especially for like the contract-based ones. Like you really need to understand exactly who the parties are and exactly how they relate to each other, and it's hard to figure that out in the first read through. I also think one thing that I found helped a lot is to use the strike through tool on the multiple choice questions. So often it's easier to like figure out what is a wrong answer than to pick the right answer. So if you're reading through and you're like, well, that's not right, you can end up guessing between 2 questions rather than feeling like you're guessing, 2 answers rather than feeling like you're guessing between 4 or 5. So I would definitely recommend doing that. And also, as I mentioned before, like these exams are hard. You're not going to get every question right. Nobody does. The pass rates are low. Like it's, you can pass with a 58% on some exams. So like if a question is impossible, like don't let it freak you out. They're meant to feel like you're failing. Like just move on. Try as much as you can. Like try to just like move on if something's really hard, and like don't worry about it.
But I mean, I know I've forgotten. I think this was forget who asked the question, but this is absolutely a real feeling that we've certainly had. And
oh yeah,
I mean your heart's pounding and you feel
horrible.
like you're going to fail. And Tess mentioned CE. I actually had a similar experience on CE specifically, where you've had 10 questions in a row where you feel like you don't know the answer and you're convinced you're going to fail, and sometimes it pans out. So
yeah, I would also say that's another reason to take the hard ones later, because like PPD, I literally thought I was failing the entire time. Like that was such a hard exam, but I knew from the previous 4 exams that like they all kind of feel like that, and just because you think you're failing definitely does not mean you're failing. So it was easier to like not get psyched out by that feeling by the end.
Here's an easy one. Okay to take PDD before PPD.
Yeah, I think so. I think that those can be interchangeable. I will say, like going from PA into PPD does make some sense because it's a nice transition and it's like a similar frame of reference. But if you have some other reason to take PDD first, that's not going to like really trip you up.
Okay. Were the exam questions straightforward as long as you know the materials, or were they tricky and need a lot of thinking? Kind of just touched on that, but they are rarely straightforward and often tricky. And I mean, it felt like, taking the SAT, something, this familiar feeling of this test is trying to trip me up. So that's, as Tess was saying, it's important to read it a few times and try crossing out the answers that you know are wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
I will
it's
say,
not going to be straightforward.
yeah, one thing about a lot of the math questions is I always found they were actually much more straightforward than it first felt like. Like often it's just getting you to do like basic multiplication. You just have to figure out what it's asking you and,
Right.
and how you solve that problem. But it's like you're not gonna have to do any crazy math. I think
If you're doing some crazy math, you're probably doing it wrong.
I think actually on CE, I think I literally did the Pythagorean theorem for some reason, which I don't remember. Like I tried to remember what that was, and we were talking about it afterwards, and you were like, "That's insane! Like you did not need to do
Yeah.
that." So if you find yourself feeling like you need to do crazy math, like take a step back, maybe like move on and come back to that question. Like not necessary. The math is always simpler than it first feels.
And there's not that much of it.
It's really not. Yep, that's true.
Okay, so what materials did you feel helped you more with PA? Do you know where I can find examples of soil survey readings?
I don't remember. I mean, I would say see if there's a drawing set in your office that has geological information or geotechnical information. Sorry. I will say that site planning handbook is probably your go-to. I don't remember if it had those specific drawings, but it's your best bet if you can't find them somewhere else. That's what I would say.
So did you skip to the case studies to see the info provided at the beginning of the exam with every single exam and then scroll back to question number 1 to start?
Yes. And I do recommend doing that, especially because it will save you a lot of time if you are going through and like as you like are like crap, I don't really know the answer to this question number 46. Like write that down on your paper and if you already knew that you had the answer, then you can write down like check IBC chapter 7, whatever, and then a super sneaky thing to do if you're very tight on time is once you're done with the case studies, if you wrote down kind of clues about what that question was, you can actually, without having to go back to the question, look up the answer in the case studies, just because sometimes like opening them takes a lot of time. I'd say that's like a mega efficient way to do it. Mm-hmm. Probably not necessary, but I definitely did that a few times.
Okay. Could each of you say what your biggest priority would be when studying for PPD if you could only pick one topic to prioritize?
So PPD. So for me going into this, I did not know very much about mechanical systems. As I mentioned, I had a structural engineering background, like kind of, not even. So I would say for that one, that was something I really needed to brush up on and to focus on because I didn't really know what the differences were, and you really do need to understand that on a conceptual level for that exam. And the Architect Studio Companion is what we recommend to study mechanical systems for PPD.
Mm-hmm. And I needed to spend a lot of time with IBC, I would say, for
codes.
PPD.
Yeah,
just with the primary material, familiarizing myself with what chapter has what content. And again, the most important thing, you should know, I think we say definitely the first 11 chapters you need to memorize.
Like memorize what they are,
not specifically what's in them necessarily, but you do need to be able to navigate that document efficiently. So Control F will only get you so far. You need to understand how it's broken down so you can find the information when it comes up. Because you'll regularly get them for the case studies, so you can use them on multiple choice. You got to write down the numbers of each question that is relevant to the IBC and then cross-reference. Okay, what are your thoughts on the new online testing option?
Oh man. So I only know what you guys know basically, like we are not in contact with NCARB, nor do we wish to be. And I know that they really haven't released that much information about it yet, which is obviously super frustrating given that they say it's going to be rolled out in the middle of November. I would say there's definitely a few good things about it. Obviously, like taking it at home, especially now during COVID, like is great. And no one should have to go to a test center right now. Like that's just ridiculous and putting you at risk. So I think that's really great. And it sounds like they're going to shorten the tests while keeping all the material the same. And shorter tests is definitely better. Like those last two were just a total beast and a test of endurance in addition to a test of the information. So I think that's also a really good change that they've made. So I think that's good. I will say I have colleagues at work that have taken like a lead AP exam and a well exam at home, to varying degrees of success. I think if you're worried about your internet connection, I would probably not recommend taking it at home. I know one woman had a bit of trouble and had to like reboot the program multiple times, and that's a much lighter software than the ARE. One thing I've just noticed at my work from home situation is like plugging in my laptop to an Ethernet to the Wi-Fi router made like a huge difference, not necessarily in the speed, but in the consistency of the connection. So if you're going to take it at home, my 2 cents, I recommend trying to do a hardwired connection. And I would say, I know they just announced that they're getting rid of the pen and paper thing, pencil and paper, which is like, I mean, it's so frustrating. I'm like so mad about that for all of you, even though we don't need to do it. I think I have a few thoughts on that. I think definitely like let your frustration be known, email them, complain, post on the forums, whatever. But then try not to let that get in your way of like your success on these exams. Like they're already throwing so many hurdles at us. Like it's so frustrating, but if you can, like try to just like accept it and move on. Once it's clear, like they're probably not going to change that. I will say, like I think so. A lot of the things that I personally used the pencil and paper for was writing down the questions that I needed to go back to, which they're giving some sort of like digital tool. Like that should be easy enough to do with that tool. Obviously, like assuming it works, which like it's NCARB, so who knows, but that should be easy enough to do. So it's not going to change your testing strategy at all. I think most of, as we mentioned, most of the calculations are straightforward and you're using the calculator anyway. So it should be easy enough to like write down the numbers and like type it out. I mean, I would have so much trouble with this. Like I totally understand the frustration. But that should be easy enough. Any of the questions where you have to like draw it out, I'm thinking of CE especially when I did that Pythagorean theorem, which I should not have done. I would say approach this by being like, okay, if I'm struggling because I can't write this down, so is everyone else. So like, don't let that freak you out. As I mentioned, they're recurving all the exams, so it's not like you're going to be compared to someone that had a pen and paper in your ability to answer that question, if that makes sense. So that's, I mean, our general approach about these is like, give yourself as many breaks as possible, just like mentally, like understand it's really hard. You're not going to get everything right. It's not going to feel easy. And I think that applies to the new pen and paper thing too.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, the last one from Eltian. Do you guys have an easy way how to find the content related to PM and PJM in the AHPP?
Okay.
I would say, well, this is a used Escrits
Yeah, you just set us up for that one.
But
just generally about AHPP, like it's a very long-winded book, which makes it very easy to read because it's not like Ballast. It's not super dense. Like they're using just a lot of words to say something. They don't need to use that many words to explain. So that has its pros and cons. Like flip through it. It's very easy to skim, which I always recommend for AHPP. Like, and a good tactic for that is like read the first sentence and the last sentence of every paragraph. Chances are you're going to have gotten the gist of what they're saying. If not, read more carefully. You got the thing.
I pulled it up.
All right.
So to answer that one specific question, I'm looking at the outline for practice management in Descrits. And from legal structures, we have chapters 1 and 3, but within 3, just sections 3.1 and 3.4, and skim chapter 5. Then we also have chapter 7, chapter 16, chapter 17, skim chapter 13, chapter 9, 9.1 through 9.5. Only. Chapter 10, 10.1 through 10.3, and 10.5. And that was just for PCM. So.
Yeah. So you're really not reading all of that book, I would say. There's definitely really important information in there, especially about like the firm financials and the firm legal structures, I would say. But you don't need to read all of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'd say. Okay, we have 30 seconds left. Thank you guys so much. This was so fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do that again. I find it very cathartic to talk about these exams, even though we're over a year done.
It's still cathartic.
And I just still have so much like frustration and anger about them that this helps me get that out. So thanks for listening.